Welcome to the MVAT Foundation Medal of Honor podcast series, featuring conversations with recipients of the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest medal for valor in combat that can be awarded to members of the armed forces. The MVAT Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission to assist veterans, service members in transition, military spouses, and Gold Star families with their post-military career success through our Heroes Linked program. My name is James Colbert, and I am the MVAT Foundation's Executive Director. This podcast you are about to listen to, spotlighting Medal of Honor recipient Staff Sergeant Ryan Pitts, was made possible by the support of Adrienne and Mike Blackman. The original live-streamed video event was broadcast on August 30, 2020. If you would like to participate in our upcoming events, go to the MVAT Foundation website, mvat.org, and click on the contact link. MVAT Foundation podcasts can be found on our YouTube channel, Apple Music, and Spotify. Search for MVAT Foundation. That's MVAT Foundation. MVAT Foundation board member Bob Jerome facilitated this event, and he leads off this podcast.
Born in Lowell, Massachusetts, Ryan enlisted in the United States Army at the age of 17, completing basic and advanced training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and then going on to airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia. From there, he would move on to Camp Ederle in Italy from the years 2004 to 2009. It was during this time that he would serve in two different deployments to Afghanistan, the first in 2005 for 12 months, and the second for 15 months beginning in 2007. It would be during this second deployment that Ryan Pitts would earn the Medal of Honor. During the summer of 2008, Ryan and his team were part of Operation Rock Move, a transfer of forces from one combat outpost being closed to another near the village of Wanat. Having already been deployed for 14 months, this was to be their last mission before leaving Afghanistan. In the overnight hours of July 13th, Ryan and his team of 8 other paratroopers were manning an observation post called Topside, located on a ridge east of the main base. It afforded a view of the valley and the village below, and it would be shortly after 4 a.m. that they reported sightings of insurgents in the high ground above the village. Then at 4:20, machine gun fire commenced from the north. Then all hell broke loose as the valley erupted in enemy fire with small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, and machine guns. Carefully choosing their targets, the enemy hit the camp's perimeter, mortar positions, vehicles capable of firing missiles, and the outpost at Topside. In the initial volley, all of the paratroopers and Ryan were hit, with 2 killed immediately. Hit with shrapnel in both legs and his arm, Ryan received enough treatment so as not to bleed to death right then and there, and continued to fight. Initially lobbing grenades at the advancing army, he then switched off to a machine gun. Because of his injuries, he could not stand, so he initially fired blind in the general direction, ultimately pulling himself up to a kneeling position to lay down more accurate fire. Fighting for their lives, the situation was becoming desperate at both the outpost and the main base. As the only remaining person capable of maintaining communication between the outpost and main base, Ryan was also directing indirect fire support from nearby artillery bases. At approximately 4:45 a.m., 2 soldiers from the main base fought their way up to the outpost to be able to provide some relief. The fight continued, and one by one, the Americans, with the exception of Ryan, were all killed. Still bleeding heavily and suffering from several concussions, Ryan radioed that everybody in the outpost was either dead or gone. At this point, the insurgents were so close, it was hard to hear Ryan's voice over theirs, but he didn't quit. Taking up a grenade launcher, he started firing nearly straight up so that the grenades could land just outside his position, because that's how far the enemy had advanced. Reinforcement arrived to find Ryan now fighting to stay alive. As they began treating him, yet another round of grenades landed, wounding all of the reinforcements. Shortly after that, the battle abated, and Ryan and other wounded could be helicoptered out. 9 soldiers never made it out of the outpost that day, and for his extraordinary bravery and actions that day, Ryan Pitts was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Obama on July 21st in 2014. Ryan, I'm going to start my questions this evening. There's a book out there that I read that talks an awful lot about these battles that was called The Chosen Few. You were part of Chosen Company. If you would just talk a little bit about the men you served with in Chosen.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bob. It was I guess I'd call us a motley crew, kids that came from all over the country for different reasons. Some of us, like myself, joined like Jack for money for school, some for adventure. Some people joined from other countries for citizenship. There were a lot of reasons why we joined, but we came together and we focused on the mission, and together we became a family. And on that day, we all fought the way that we did because we loved each other. And it really was probably the most incredible team that I've ever had a privilege of being a part of.
Ryan, when the first shots were fired at around 4 a.m., this was not the first time that the enemy had tried to sniper fire into your positions. Did it feel like this was going to be any different than any of the other previous skirmishes?
I had a feeling, right from the opening volley of fire, it started with that burst of machine gun fire from the north. And immediately they had, as you talked about, they had isolated or pinpointed all our major weapon systems, our mortar tubes. They had targeted gun trucks. They targeted the observation post and put down very accurate rocket-propelled grenade fire. And I think all of us, within just the first few seconds, knew that this was going to be a fight unlike any the rest of us had ever been in, just given the volume of fire coming in. There were 50 Americans on the ground. Estimates of the enemy forces put them in 150 to 200 or 300 enemy fighters. They had infiltrated the village. They had come in to as close as 10 meters in some places. They had us surrounded. They had the element of surprise. They had the high ground. So we knew pretty early on that this was going to be a pretty unique fight.
Because of what you just mentioned, the pinpoint accuracy of the initial firing, was there any afterthought or suspicion that they had a plant somewhere within your ranks or within the village?
We had suspicions in the days leading up to the attack. We noticed a lot of what we call fighting age males were hanging around, watching us, sipping tea in the bazaar, walking around our perimeter, observing us working on our fighting positions. So we had the feeling that we were being watched and kind of scouted for an attack. And we had known that with breaking the base down further north, about 20 kilometers north, that we had suspected that those fighters that were massing to try and overrun that outpost would move down the valley and attack us. And I believe our platoon leader and company commander Matt Meyer and Lieutenant John Brostrom had a dinner meeting with one of the village elders who had told us that there was a high likelihood that there was going to be an attack.
A lot of your colleagues from both the War on Terror and in Jack's case, the Vietnam War, talked about the fact that fear actually played a role in their actions, not as a detractor, but as a motivator. How would you address that?
Well, I think fear, anytime I've fought, I think it would be the same for my peers. Fear is an element of that battle or any battle. Through training, you learn to fall back on your skills and the situation and understanding these are the tools that I have available. These are the actions that are expected of me, of the team. Every team member has a role to play, right? They're not all the same, but they're all equally important. And I think on that day, I could say that everybody had a measure of fear. But it's the love you have for the people around you. It is the conscious decision to put fighting, to put your brother's lives, to taking some action to make a difference that day supersedes whatever fear you have. And I can say for myself that it was choosing to do something over that fear, letting that fear be a motivator to push you to the love you have for your brothers be greater than that fear. And, all I had to do was look around at guys like Jason Bogar standing up and exposing himself to enemy fire to return fire and treat me, or Jonathan Ayers getting struck while manning a machine gun and then getting right back up. So, fear was everywhere that day, but we didn't let it control us.
Well, speaking of getting struck, you're wounded to the point where the best that you can do is fight from a kneeling position. What kept you going?
Well, I mean, like you asked in the beginning, right, did we have an idea of the magnitude of this fight? And I had been in other firefights over the course of that deployment and prior deployments. I had seen people get wounded, unfortunately, others that were killed. But we all knew pretty early on that regardless of your wounds, that if you could make an impact in the battle, whether that was loading magazines or treating casualties or talking on the radio, you had to do something. You had to give whatever you could if we wanted everybody, to come home.
Over the course of the battle, Ryan, did there ever come a time where you felt that there was just nothing left? You just had no more to give, that you just might not survive this?
Well, for me, Bob, there was a moment when I found myself, when I was by myself, that was a pretty sobering moment. I crawled around and I looked to our lower fighting positions. I looked at our upper fighting positions. I didn't want to yell out because I didn't want the enemy to figure out that I was the only American alive there. So I crawled around and I could, see my brothers down on the ground, not moving. Once I had searched and scouted each fighting position and moved back to where I came from, that was a pretty sobering moment. My legs weren't working. I couldn't stand up. I had limited mobility and even my left arm. There's only so many tools. It was just me. There was a moment of, okay, this is going to be the end. Can I even do anything anymore? And then I think, it really comes back to training, of looking around at the resources that I had and just thinking about what is the next thing I can do in this battle. I had very quickly made peace with what I thought was going to be, the short rest of my life was going to be at that fighting position, that my goal was just to try and make the largest impact that I could while I could still fight. And I wasn't going to give the opportunity to the enemy to take me alive. So I think just like everybody else that day, there were moments where the situation seemed dire, but quitting was never an option. Everybody else was still fighting. I had to do the same.
Thank God for that, Ryan. I want to talk now. The battle finally recedes. Talk about the journey for Ryan Pitts from the outpost ultimately back home. How were you evacuated? Where were you taken? How long was your recovery?
Yeah, I mean, the evacuation itself was pretty incredible, because really at no point while I was there on the ground, regardless of when we started getting fire missions coming in, artillery started falling, the Air Force had showed up, bombs were dropping, Apaches had come on station and were fine. There was really, the fire from the enemy never stopped coming in. It was always just coming right down on us. And I can remember after it was Jacob Soanes, Israel Garcia, Sean Samaru, and Mike Denton were the four that had fought their way up from our vehicle patrol base in the center of the village up to the observation post, and they were all wounded. And we're sitting there, and I'm watching the first medevac helicopter land down in the center of the village, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're going to have to wait our turn. That's going to be our way out, is out of the middle of the village. And I can hear over the radio, they ask us to pop smoke, and I think we're just marking our location. And we throw smoke up the hillside between us and the enemy. And I watch as this medevac helicopter comes in, flares, and lands right on the hillside between us and the enemy, under fire. And not only do they land that bird under fire, putting their aircraft and their crews at risk, those crew chiefs and those medics left that helicopter and started coming down the hill to get our guys, to get me and my brothers. And that image is one that's seared into my memory that I've never forgotten, of the risk that these people, yes, we all wore the same uniform, but they didn't know us. We had never done a mission together. We had never met them face to face, but the risks that they were willing to take because that was their job has left a huge impression on me on what it means to fulfill your duty, regardless of the consequences. So I got on that helicopter. I flew out with Sean Samaru, Mike Denton, and Jacob Sones. I moved through a series of bases in Afghanistan. They would stop and triage us on the way to Bagram Airfield and the final hospital. There, they had consolidated all of the casualties from the battle. I had some surgeries there in Bagram, got stabilized before they then moved us back to Landstuhl, Germany. Some of our comrades went back to Italy to convalesce. That's where our unit was stationed. And then I and some others took the long trip back from Landstuhl, Germany to Walter Reed, where I spent my last year in the Army recovering and going through the med board process.
Looking at the events in their entirety that day, Ryan, is there any one moment or thing that stands out above all others and is the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, Bob, I think what comes to mind is that there was valor everywhere that day. There is not just one individual who risked their life, put others before themselves. So I'll tell you a couple of different stories. You talked about the trucks, and we had a tow missile truck with us out at the Vehicle Patrol Base. The enemy targeted that early on. That crew stayed in that truck for as long as they could. But when the truck was on fire, burning around them, they're manning their weapon system. They're trying to fight the enemy. But they stayed there until it just wasn't possible anymore, till the truck was at risk of exploding. And so they vacated that vehicle, moved their way to other fighting positions. Well, as that truck's there burning, it eventually exploded, and it ejected a flaming tow missile about 30 yards through the air that landed in a fighting position. Now, where the Vehicle Patrol Base was really kind of this open field in the middle of the center of the village. And the fighting positions were really just, I mean, it's a fancy term for just holes that our guys dug alongside these up-armored Humvees. And as this flaming missile lands in this position, all the guys are getting ready. They're looking around, looking for where's the closest fighting position. You're looking for to be anywhere where a flaming missile is not. One guy, Eric Phillips, takes action. He sees this flaming missile and goes, one guy taking a risk running this thing out in the open is better than 8 or 9 of us trying to cover open ground and get someplace else. So he grabs this flaming missile, picks it up, runs it out into the middle of the field, and sets it down. And not only does he set it down, run this thing out there, risking his life, he has the clarity to think about, all right, if this thing cooks off, if this missile launches, what's the safe direction? Somehow he was able to do all that, grab that flaming missile, run it into the open, set it down in a safe-ish direction, and then make it back to his fighting position, saving the lives of his comrades there. There were guys like Reed Grapes and Dylan Meyer and Adam Hamby that, some of our weapon systems in the up-armored Humvees, the Humvees would have these armored turrets, right? So there's steel all the way around. There's a shield in the front where you're relatively covered from behind, but all the enemy is attacking all these heavily armored vehicles, our heavy weapon systems. Well, one of our systems was a Mark 19 grenade launcher that would shoot 40 millimeter grenades about 3 kilometers. It's a grenade launcher machine gun. Well, to reload these, you couldn't reload them from inside the turret. The ammo cans were too heavy. It was too awkward. You didn't really have the space to maneuver. Guys would repeatedly jump up on the hoods of Humvees to reload these weapon systems with a complete lack of cover, completely exposed to enemy fire as bullets are just falling like raindrops on these Humvees. And they did it time and time and time again. I talked a little about Jonathan Ayers. Jonathan Ayers was manning a machine gun on our eastern flank at the position I was at Observation Post Topside. And very critical. He's one of our heavy weapon systems. He's laying down fire on the enemy. He takes a round right off the helmet that knocks him back, right onto his back. And I think about in that moment that Ayers has got to know that if he gets back up on that gun, if they got him once and they're really targeting like that, he knows that there's a possibility that they'll get him again and they might not be so lucky. Well, Jonathan Ayers made that decision and got back up on that gun and continued to fire on the enemy until that next round came in that killed him. There was a point in the battle, when I was by myself, Bob, and I called down for help to the Vehicle Patrol Base, and my comrades, everybody with the radio could hear the enemy talking in the background. They could hear me whispering, and they could hear the enemy talking through my radio. Our company commander, Matt Meyer, being in command, it's a burden, right? There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. He's got to look out for the mission. He's got to look out for everybody. He's got to make the most sound tactical decisions that he can. And he told me that there weren't people to send. And I trusted him. I didn't resent him for that in that moment. I trusted him completely. I understood that was not an easy decision for him to make. Well, Jacob Sones overheard that call, and he heard that I was by myself, and he knew that if somebody didn't come for me, that death was going to be, the outcome for me. And he said, "That's Sergeant Pitts up there. We're going. I'm going." His squad leader, Ilzir Garcia, says, "You're not going alone. Let's go." They fought their way to our first squad's position, linked up with Sean Samaru and Mike Denton, and they fought their way into the observation post. Sean Samaru engaging an enemy that was standing up on a rock, firing down into our fighting positions at the observation post. At this point in the battle, we've already been fighting for probably about an hour, and ammunition starting to run low. That while Garcia and Sones are starting to treat me, Samaru and Denton have to start searching our casualties for ammo. They're searching our killed in action guys to take ammo off of them to sustain the fight. And Mike Denton told me the story, and I didn't see it with my own eyes, but I can visualize it. Mike Denton had to search one of the guys that was up at the observation post, Jason Hovader. Jason Hovader was Mike Denton's best friend in the entire world. Mike searched his best friend's dead body for ammunition, took what he could use, looked at him, told him he loved him, and moved on to the next guy. When that volley came in that wounded Samaru, Denton, mortally wounded Garcia, and Sones and myself again, as we collected in the southern fighting position and we're trying to treat each other and figure out what's going on and get on the radio and call in the situation, most of us aren't in any shape. I can't stand, Samaru can't stand, neither can Garcia or Sones. I look over and I see Mike Denton perforated with a shrapnel up and down his leg into his back. He was our machine gunner. He was right-hand dominant, so he carried a machine gun and he would fire with his right hand. He had taken a piece of shrapnel through his right hand, the bone sticking out. He's propped his machine gun up on his right arm, switched to his non-dominant hand, and he's standing there pulling security still with everything that's happened, searching his dead best friend, getting hit the way that he did, that nobody would have had anything to say about him taking a seat and tending to his wounds. This 20-year-old kid, not even old enough to buy a beer, stand up and protect his brothers. And Garcia gave his life for mine. And I could talk to you for hours about the things everybody did, but there are stories like this, probably 48, 49 stories for everybody that was there that day. So no, that was a long answer to your short question, Bob. There's not just one.
It's quite an answer.
It's the collective of what we did together that day that sticks out in my mind.
Thank you, Ryan. We have a question I'm going to pose to you from our audience. Adam Lucas asked the question. We know within chosen company, Kyle White also received the Medal of Honor. Was any of the air crew that did all the evacs that day and went through the conditions you described, did they? I know that none of them received the Medal of Honor, but were there other awards that day?
Yeah, I can't remember all off the top of my head, but I know there were, the Valor Awards or for like air crews, like the Air Medal and such. I'm sure Bronze Stars with medal, PSMVs, Bronze Star Medal with Valor, Silver Stars. They were a highly decorated outfit. I know one of the medics that came down and got me, he received a Silver Star for his actions of being lowered down by a hoist in the Korengal with Battle Company, under fire. So there were awards across the full spectrum of everybody that were there that day.
Ryan, how did you hear you were to receive the Medal of Honor?
Yeah, I had, my commander had told me, our battalion commander, my company commander had also told me that I was originally nominated for the Distinguished Service Cross, and it had gotten upgraded somewhere along the way. I just wanted to come home and move on with my life. I've never felt, and still to this day don't feel, that I gave any more than anybody else. I mean, you just heard all the stories that I just told, and that's just a handful of valor that was everywhere. But ultimately, the definitive of knowing that I was going to get it came from my buddy Kyle White, who's also a recipient. He was going through his process. He was actually at the Pentagon doing his, pre-ceremony visits with Army leadership, doing some of his training, getting ready for his ceremony, when he texted me and told me that it asked me if it was okay if he gave them my number, because they were going to be reaching out pretty soon. That was the unofficial way that I learned. Officially, everybody learns by a call from the president. I can remember I was in my living room. I had heard a couple days in advance, hey, I'm just going to make up a day here, on June 10th, the president's going to call you and tell you that you're going to be awarded the Medal of Honor. So make sure you're in a place with good cell phone reception, or you have a landline, and be ready to take that call. So I took the day off from work, and I was sitting in my living room at home. And I wasn't nervous at all leading up to this point. Then I get the call, and it's somebody from the president just doesn't call you out of the blue. There's somebody that calls you first to make sure that you're ready to talk, and that they actually get somebody on the other end of the line. And, asked me how I was doing. How are you doing, Mr. Pitts? Okay, well, can you hold for the president? And to me, that seemed like the most ridiculous question. Of course I'm going to hold for the president. I'm not going anywhere. And then there might have been, if it was 10 seconds of silence, it felt like 2 minutes or 2 hours of being on hold. And that's when I started to get worried of, did the call drop? I'm looking at my phone. And then the president came on and told me that I'd be receiving the Medal of Honor. And I just remember the general conversation. I can't remember anything specific that he said, because it was too surreal.
I've watched the video of your award ceremony, and obviously it's a very solemn occasion, and the president's remarks were magnificent. Standing on that stage that day, the medal is draped around your neck. What were the thoughts going through your head through the ceremony and at the presentation of the medal? And were any of the surviving members of your unit in the audience?
Yeah, it all felt very surreal. As the president was reading the narrative and of the story leading up to the actual citation of the award, I couldn't help but go back to that day and visualize, almost relive it, seeing it. And directly in front of me, we lost 9 guys that day: Sergio Abad, Jonathan Ayers, Jason Bogar, Jonathan Brostrom, Israel Garcia, Jason Hovader, Matthew Phillips, Pruitt Rainey, and Gunners Willing. And we had family members from almost every one of them there, and they were directly in front of me with my family. And off to the left were almost everybody from our company, from our platoon, that were in the battle that day, including our fellow soldiers from Destin Company that were with us. The air crews were there. Most of the first 2 medevac crews, the pilots and crew chiefs and medics, the first 2 that arrived in Wanat, they were there, as well as the first 2 Apache gunships, the crews, the first 2 Apache gunships that showed up. So there were the families directly in front of me, and my team off to the left. And for me, I couldn't help but think that this is ours. I can't separate my actions from anything anybody else did that day. I did the same things everybody else did. But I couldn't help but feel pride of thinking about, like, I will accept this on behalf of all of us. This belongs to, looking at the Gold Star families, this belongs to your loved ones who made it possible for me to even be here. And it's also it was possible because of all these guys over here that some of them taught me, some of them were brothers that I grew up with in the Army, and some were soldiers that I led that inspired me that day. And we did it all together.
On a little bit of a lighter note, it's customary, and many in our audience may not know this, but any person in uniform, irrespective of rank, when they pass in front of or come across a soldier wearing the Medal of Honor, they come to attention and they salute. So you were in full dress, you have the Medal of Honor around your neck. Did senior officers start saluting you, and what was that like?
They did. I was enlisted, right? So all my salutes were outbound. Sky soldier, sir, good day, ma'am. I wasn't usually the one returning a salute. So I could remember that it threw me off a bit. And I actually had an opportunity to go back to Italy where my unit was stationed. And I did PT with my unit one morning. I went out with 2nd Platoon and did PT with them. And I'm just in civilian clothes, and this guy's walking by about 20 yards away, and I hear "Sky Soldiers," which was our greeting of the day in our unit, and I just kind of start looking around. I'm like, who's leaving this guy hanging? Like, just letting him keep walking, holding his hand up. And he sees me look around, and I look at him, he goes, "Yeah, I'm talking to you." I've returned the salute, but it's been something that I've never quite gotten used to.
Ryan, there are commonly referred to 6 words that are used as the pillars for the Medal of Honor: courage, commitment, citizenship, integrity, patriotism, selfless service, and sacrifice. There's a program in our schools now to help young men and women understand the meaning of the medal and what it stands for. You have young children. I know that you have gotten in front of audiences of young people. As a recipient of the medal, what is the message that you want to convey to young people and future generations of young people?
Yeah, so the program you're referring to with the Medal of Honor Society is the character development program. And I think, regardless who I talk to of age, is just that they have the power to make a difference. That character isn't something that you just stumble across. I try and tell them that I'm going to spend a lifetime becoming the man that I want to be. And that those things that you were just talking about, citizenship, patriotism, valor, those are all things that we can demonstrate in our daily lives. I think we overlook, it's easy to look at combat as maybe the pinnacle of courage, right? With that imminent or that possibility of death. But I think that there are opportunities every day, especially with kids. We see the stories of bullying, that sometimes the hardest thing is to stand up to people whose opinions you respect when you tell them that they're wrong. That takes courage, and that that they'll be working every day to become the people that they want to be. And it's okay if you're not that right now. You can get there someday. It takes work, right? Just that they have the power to change whatever it is that they want.
Ryan, my last question for you this evening. Every one of your fellow recipients that I have posed this question to has a version of the same answer. And it's that a lot of them say that when they put that medal around their neck, that sometimes it's harder to wear the medal than it was to earn it. And they talk about the weight of the medal. What are your thoughts as you wear our nation's highest award for valor?
One of the hardest things, Bob, after being awarded, there's a difference between knowing and accepting. When I was notified that I would receive the award, and when I received the award, I knew that it was the team. It wasn't me. I did not do anything differently than anybody there that day. I was following my peers. I was inspired by the soldiers that I led, like Jason Bogar and Jonathan Ayers and Pruitt Rainey and Gunners Willing, that, like I said before, I'm unable to separate my actions from those of anybody else that day. And it was really hard when you're the one receiving the award, not to feel like you're the one that's being highlighted. And I knew that it belonged to the team, but I hadn't really accepted it. I hadn't taken comfort in that yet. And maybe I never will. I accept it now. That is what it is. And so whenever I have the opportunity, like I did tonight, to talk about, the 9 that didn't come home, and guys like Mike Denton and Eric Phillips and Dylan Meyer and all the rest of the guys, to highlight their actions, that's a responsibility that is part of the weight that accompanies the award. And I think it's broader than that, because as you were mentioning before, how many service members have taken action worthy of the award that have just been lost to time, that were not seen or were never around to tell their story. And there are millions of men and women out there right now serving that we accept the risk when you put on the uniform. We don't always get to choose where we go, but we do what we're told. And I think it represents the collective sacrifice of everybody that's worn the uniform and what they're willing to do, especially those that have never gotten the recognition that they deserve. So it absolutely has a weight to it. I mean, it certainly doesn't feel like mine. I'm just a caretaker.
We have 2 questions from our guests. The first one comes from Jamil Martin, and it's a marvelous question considering the organization that is presenting this tonight. And I will read it. Number 1, first of all, from Jamil Ryan, it's a towering sense of honor to connect with you. As a Marine who's been transitioning out of the military after 5 years of service, I realize the insurmountable complexity behind transitioning and how it's affecting the veteran community as a whole. Do you think the current transition tools and resources being offered can be improved? Well, I guess that's the whole purpose of Heroes Linked, but from your words, Ryan, talk a little bit about the transition.
Yeah, first, thank you for your service to our country. Transition is difficult. Do I think that the tools and resources, even to those in uniform getting out, can be better? Look, I grew up in the military learning that you can always be better tomorrow than you are today. Everything can be improved upon. I also think when I look back at my own transition, now I was at Walter Reed. I had known at that time that I was going to come back and go to college. I had already applied to college. I'd been accepted to the University of New Hampshire, thought I knew what I wanted to do. I don't think that I took advantage as much as I should have or could have of the resources that were there, regardless of how good or not good they were. So I think there is a certain amount of responsibility that's on us as service members to take control of our own transition. That if those tools that aren't provided, to us immediately, let's go find other tools. On the flip side of that, or actually to accompany that, I think transition from the military, people ask me, how was your transition? For me, I'm still transitioning. I can tell you right now, I am about 11 years removed from the Army, and there's not a day that goes by where I don't think about it, where I don't miss it, and remember how much I loved what I did. Transition is going to bring different challenges at different times. What I try to encourage veterans transitioning to do is just be kind to yourself and patient. Understand that it may be cyclical. It may not be linear. Like, it's okay. You're going to run into challenges. I know that I spent 6 years in uniform. A good part of that I spent thinking about what it was going to be like when I got out. Thinking that it was going to be great and, everything's going to be easy compared to Afghanistan. I mean, I really thought, like, civilian life, I've been shot at in the mountains of Afghanistan, civilian life's going to be a cakewalk. It's just different. I think that was a lack of appreciation that I had for what all people, all Americans endure, that there are challenges in life. We're not the only ones that are challenged, but we got to keep our head up. I try to focus and think about what are the things that we can affect change in. Come up with a plan, think about where you want to be, and take positive action on that.
And Jamil, I would remind you Don's opening remarks, and he talked again about them in his close, but go to mvat.org and click on the link for Heroes Linked. That is really what we're all about. But it's interesting, Ryan, the next question, which came from Randy, following up on what you just said, tell us what you're doing in your life now.
Well, I work with my family's small construction business, help run it, working on growing it. I have two small children. I have a 5-year-old daughter that's about to start kindergarten next week, and a 7-year-old son that's about to start second grade, and a loving wife. I'm just trying to keep up with them. That's what's going on in my life right now.
Ryan, they're not teenagers yet. You don't even know what keeping up means.
I know.
All right, Ryan, thank you ever so much. And before I turn the program back to Don Schwartz, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you to save a place in your thoughts and in your hearts for all of our soldiers, past and present. For those of you with us today who have served, along with the men and women over history who left the peace and safety of their homes to defend and fight for this country, its principles, and our freedom, we thank you all. As much as we pay homage to all of those who have fought for us and our ideals, we know that we owe a most special debt to the men and women in uniform, 9 of Ryan's comrades who made the ultimate sacrifice. Abraham Lincoln said in his famous speech at Gettysburg, "It is the job of the living to take increased responsibility to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion." This also applies not just to those who made the sacrifice, but to the Gold Star family survivors that they left behind. It is because of the sacrifices of these fallen heroes, as well as because of those who have served and come home, we're not just the freest nation on earth, but also the most prosperous, the most successful, and the most secure. Every one of us can state what more than 6 billion people around the globe would love to be able to say, but cannot. I'm an American. I live in freedom. And while they aren't recognized as such, and you heard today, if you ask Ryan and any recipient if they consider themselves to be a hero, without hesitation, they're going to tell you no. But you are, Ryan, and those who you served with are also heroes. And like every other hero, they never rehearsed for the role. In each case, it came down to a moment in time where character, courage, and mental toughness all came together against horrific and terrifying odds. Any one of our young men and women in uniform today could very well be our next hero. Jack in his absence, and Ryan, to you, I say, as a friend and as a colleague, and on behalf of all of those who are with us tonight, thank you for the freedom you nearly gave your life defending. And it is now my pleasure to turn the program back to Don Schwartz, the chairman of MVAT.
Thank you, Ryan and Bob. I can hear the virtual applause. Thanks each of you for such an informative and enlightening program. To our audience, thank you for your participation, your terrific questions. I thought that the question about transition was particularly timely, as our program deals with that, and we encourage any active duty or transitioning service member to look at Heroes Linked. You can either tab to it from the MVAT website or go directly to the Heroes Linked website. To help us ensure that our programs survive and succeed, please consider a tax-deductible donation, which can be made on our website, mvat.org. Your support is welcomed and needed. Normally, I close my events with the usual remark about driving home safely. Tonight, all I can say is enjoy the rest of your Sunday, hug your family, stay safe, and thank you for participating.